Canada indeed. Sean Clifford goes out early, sick and injured. In comes Christian Veilleux, quarterback who literally was seeing his first live game action in 2 years since his junior year of high school. But no matter, he goes on to throw a hat trick of touchdowns and ultimately help lead Penn State to a comfortable 28-zip win over Rutgers. Once again, Tim Aiden from Black Shoe Diaries, joined by my BSD colleague, Marty Leap. Marty, how are we feeling?
Yeah, we're feeling pretty good. It's nice to be doing one of these after a win again. We haven't had too many of them down the stretch this season, but no, I mean, it was a good day for Penn State. A great day, obviously, for Christian Veilleux, and not just for Veilleux, but as we will get into, the entire Canadian contingency on this roster, which for those of you who may not know and are about to find out, there are a lot more Canadian players on Penn State's roster than you probably think.
Indeed. We touched on Christian Veilleux. Malik Mega, another Canadian, came up with his first career touchdown. It was a 67-yard catch, which, geez, there was nobody within sight of him. It seemed like completely broken coverage. Raced that one to the end. It reminded me a bit, actually, of similar to the Canada theme. It reminded me of 2015 during the nighttime beatdown of Rutgers. Akeel Lynch, just the parting of the seas, runs like 75 yards untouched to the end zone right before halftime, and that kind of sealed the game there. So that it felt reminiscent of that in a way. And another Canadian, John Sutherland, a guy who's been much maligned by the fan base over the years. In his final game at Beaver Stadium, comes up with an interception late in the game, so good on him. But I guess going back to Veilleux, as I mentioned before, it's his first. Kid didn't play any live game action his senior year of high school because of COVID. The school that he played at, he played his high school ball in the U.S. actually at a school near me, and it's in the Bullis School in Potomac, Maryland. But Bullis School canceled their season in 2020, so they decided to go back to Canada and just train up there while he prepared to come to Penn State. Marty, would you say you were very pleasantly surprised by how he looked out there? I mean, especially because, obviously Cliff didn't look anywhere near 100%. Something definitely reverted to the bad Cliff that, we got to know all too well the previous couple years. But, even the most optimistic Penn State fan probably didn't see Veilleux putting up stats like you can see running along the bottom line there. 235 yards passing on a 15 to 24 passing attempts, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions.
Yeah, I mean, Veilleux is a quarterback in high school I was very high on. Now, this obviously has since changed, or will change, I should say, when Drew Allar signs with the Nittany Lions next month. But I thought at the time that Veilleux was signed, he was the most just gifted quarterback and talented passer, best tools, however you want to put it, of any quarterback the Nittany Lions had signed since James Franklin became head coach. Clemson made a late run at him right before he committed to Penn State, so clearly the talent's there with the kid. I thought we saw it on Saturday. He was really good in that short to intermediate passing game. He had some deep pass attempts that, there was the one to Cam Sullivan-Brown that was a good throw, and I kind of put that one a little bit more on the coaching staff more than Sullivan-Brown or Veilleux, because that's just not Sullivan-Brown's game. I feel like if that's Dotson or Keandre Lambert-Smith, that's probably a long touchdown. Had some other deep balls with a nice throw. And, I mean, like I said, I've always been high on the kid, so I'm not surprised he played well. But like you said, Tim, I don't think anybody could have expected him to play as well as he did on Saturday, especially with earlier in the season, against Iowa, when we saw Taquan Roberson, as much as he was struggling, they did not take him out of the game. Them going with Clifford against Illinois when he's extremely banged up led me to believe that, maybe not necessarily a lack of talent or anything like that for Veilleux, but he just wasn't ready yet, which would have been understandable. As you mentioned, he had not played a live football game since the fall of 2019 when he was a junior in high school. So it would be very understandable if the coaching staff thought he wasn't ready yet. But, he's thrust into action today, and he passed that test with flying colors.
Indeed. Yeah, I mean, granted, I guess I have kind of forgotten about Vayu, and I do remember now reading about how, he was, he had pretty solid high school career. Maybe not, obviously not, maybe not Drew Hour eye popping type performance, but enough to be considered one of the top pro style quarterbacks in 24/7's 2021 class. So, it's not like this kid was some, scrub they just happened to grab from up north. But, a kid who Kirk Sherrock at the time, who was the offensive coordinator, that was a kid that he grabbed within the first few months of being at Penn State. So, it's good to see, see him come in, get thrust into a situation like this and, not only look competent, but really, I mean, he really threw some nice darts. I mean, I'm thinking about the first score of the game right before halftime. That's third down. They're knocking on the door inside, I think inside the Rutgers 10. He gets kind of chased out of the pocket a bit, but he keeps his eyes down towards the end zone and hits Jahan Dotson in the corner with a lovely dart for a touchdown. And that, to me, that was a huge momentum changer. It's, you're facing the possibility of either being scoreless or maybe just going up 3-0 at the half. And instead, here you are, you go up 7-zip. Your defense had been holding Rutgers in check. They hadn't even crossed midfield at that point. Rutgers didn't even cross midfield, I believe, until late third quarter, early fourth quarter.
Yeah, I think it was early fourth quarter when they finally crossed midfield.
Right. So this is, so to get up 7-zip like that right before the half against a, offense, Rutgers team that hadn't really been doing much offense, that felt like a nice blow delivered to them. And then, of course, the second touchdown drive when he hits Parker Washington. It seemed like he might get sacked or he's just trying to might just tuck it and run. Instead, he looks downfield and hits Parker Washington. Washington made a great adjustment for the ball and brings it in. Makes it 14-zip about midway for the third quarter. And I actually said in the Slack channel, I called ball game right there and then, just with the way of how Penn State's defense was playing. I felt 14 points was going to be insurmountable for Rutgers offense. The way they looked. They didn't have much of a ground game, and Noah Vedral just outside of a couple throws to Bo Melton just didn't wasn't anything spectacular. So this was kind of, even though early on I'll say I kind of had those Illinois type vibes where Penn State's continually getting great field position, winning the field possession battle early on, starting either like in their own beyond their own 35 or even in Rutgers territory and come away with no points. You kind of got those flashbacks from the Illinois game in a sense. But at the same time, unlike the Illinois game, Rutgers couldn't run the ball. And I guess like Illinois, though, they also really couldn't throw it that well either. Even though I'd say I put Bill Melton over any of Illinois' receivers.
Yeah, I mean, early on, it definitely had a lot of the same vibes that Illinois game, and you had to be thinking, "Oh no, here we go again." And I do think, and this obviously is not a knock on Sean Clifford at all. You and I both have sung his praises throughout the season. He's always been a really, really tough kid. I think getting Vayu in there and just having the healthy quarterback definitely made a big difference too. For those who may not know, the flu bug hit Penn State and hard this week. Sean Franklin, my Lord, James Franklin said after the game that as of yesterday, walk-on Mason Stahl was set to start at quarterback because Vayu was also dealing with this flu bug, and the Nittany Lions had no scholarship quarterbacks available.
I had no idea about that part.
Yeah, he said in the post-game interview on the Big Ten Network, he said they had, I believe he said 36 players that were unavailable for one reason or another today. We saw it up front. They were down 3 starters on the offensive line because of this flu bug. They don't have linebacker Curtis Jacobs. So, and with Clifford, he's been banged up to begin with, and you throw in a flu bug, man, it's tough to play through all that. And I think getting Vayu in there made a big difference even on that front, just to have the healthy quarterback who could use his legs. I mean, I thought one thing Vayu did a tremendous job of today was using his legs and go get the first down when it was available. For the most part, he did an excellent job hanging in the pocket. Even when the pocket started to collapse, he'd hang in there, scan the defense, go through his progressions and find a receiver. And if it wasn't there, he made the safe throw or tucked it and got 3-4 yards and slid or ducked out of bounds. So again, I think those are plays that with Sean Clifford in his current physical state, I'm not sure he'd be capable of making them, or if he would try and make them, how much they would allow him. I feel like we saw that against Illinois. There were times he could have run for chunks and he didn't do it. And I wonder how much that was the coaching staff telling him not to, which I don't blame them either, because the guy's already banged up. You don't want to really put him in a bad spot. So I do think having the health of Vayu made a big difference as well. And he just looked like a kid as the game went on. That confidence grew. Like you said, that throw to Dotson for the touchdown for halftime, that was an absolute he threaded the needle with that, put it in that window, helped create that window, honestly. And, there were multiple throws like that throughout the day from Vayu, and just you could not ask for more of him in this game. And it definitely makes you feel a lot better. We'll get into the Michigan State matchup later on the show, but heading into that game of Sparty next weekend, if Clifford is not healthy, seeing what Vayu has done, and yes, it was against Rutgers, but still just having that confidence, having that game experience now for Vayu could go a long way.
Well, indeed. I'd say I guess the other thing when I noticed with Vayu went in was the offensive line suddenly looked, even despite being down a few starters, looked adequate, I guess is the right word, at least in pass protection. And even run blocking seemed a bit better overall too. So I don't know. What was it? Just a matter of changing quarterbacks, or is it a matter just maybe there's certain guys who are, buried on the depth chart that probably should have been playing instead of some of the starters who were out? I think it's a combination, something else.
Yeah, I mean, I thought one thing with the offensive line I really like to see was Lana Tangwell, who was their highest rated recruit in last year's recruiting class, was a 5-star by some services. Finally saw his first career action today. And, he was the right tackle, and I didn't notice him, which if you don't notice an offensive lineman, that's usually a pretty good thing. Offensive linemen a lot of time are like referees. You only notice them if they're not doing their job. So, and there were a couple plays where I would single him out because I wanted to watch him because just how highly rated of a lineman he was and everything. And he looked good. It was nice to see him. This was the first game he played in, so he could play the rest of the way and not burn his red shirt. So regardless of the health situation up front, I really am hoping we see Tangwell next week and then in the bowl game. And even some of the other younger guys who got some reps today. Jimmy Chris got a few reps in the second half at offensive tackle. And even just things like that can be beneficial in the long run. Des Holmes was out there getting some run just to get these guys some reps. And, a guy like Tangwell, who you still expect to be a big part of your offensive line moving forward. I thought Juice Scruggs, making his first career start at center, played his best game of the season, which I don't think is a coincidence because I felt all along his best spot is center. And I feel like he stuck more at guard because of Mike Miranda's physical limitations make him better suited for center. But, it was good to see some of these guys like a Scruggs, like a Tangwell, who you're going to look to build your offensive line around next year, play well. And yeah, people can say, yeah, but it was Rutgers. But one thing Rutgers has done well all season is they have a good defensive line and a pretty solid defense. It's Greg Schiano. He's always going to have a good defense. That's what he's known for. It's what he prides himself on. And, pushing Rutgers defensive line around like they did at times in the second half and just being able to move the ball the way they did, it was encouraging to see, especially with all the injuries, all the flu bugs. Penn State had a lot of reasons to just lay down and die in this game, and they didn't.
Right. I think you hit on it well with the Rutgers defense. I think maybe some people might make the mistake of thinking, well, it's Rutgers, so, how can they be good in any spot? But yeah, like you said, the defense, the front seven especially was well regarded. Maybe not like, no one's going to mistake him for Georgia's defense, for example, but, they've been a pretty solid bunch all year long. I mean, this is the same Rutgers defense that really just kind of shut out Michigan in the second half when they were down 20-3, and it looked like Michigan just needed one more touchdown to really just put it away completely or start a rout, and they just it helped them hang around. And they made it a 20-13 nail biter of a win for Michigan because of that. So, to see this Penn State come out and just ultimately roll them for 28 points, especially when it didn't look so good for the first half. I don't know if you follow this guy Timothy Burke on Twitter.
I don't think I do.
It's a lot of I think he used to do stuff for Deadspin back in the he always puts these videos together. Like he has, I don't know, he must have access to, because he'll put stuff like college football calls in Russian or Spanish or whatever. But but anyways, he had a nice compilation of like the first half highlights of Penn State Rutgers. It's just punt.
Oh, the punts! I did see that. Yeah, someone did retweet that onto my timeline. That was beautiful. I think I retweeted it with the Black Sheep Diaries Twitter account.
I mean, for considering how it was looking for the first, to come out and put up 28 on this defense ultimately was, it's pretty impressive. It's the offense of Rutgers that's, the part that really needs to improve if they're really gonna start to get people's attention in the Big Ten. That being said, Rutgers 5-6. Maryland. I haven't checked the score of Michigan, but I'm assuming if Michigan takes care of business, then Maryland falls to 5-6. So that makes next week's Rutgers Maryland matchup a de facto bowl playing game. And frankly, I think given how Rutgers defense plays, I like their chances at home against the Terps. But then again, Maryland does have a dynamic passing game led by Tua Tagovailoa. So we'll see. That's kind of a game I'm kind of going to keep an eye on, even with Ohio State, Michigan going on next week. I guess I'm just intrigued by such things in a sick way. Do the sickos meme, but
yeah, I mean, like I said to you guys in the Black Sheep Diaries Slack channel, I feel like that Rutgers and Maryland should be the ABC primetime game next week. So I'm right there with you on that one.
I'd watch it, like bowl playing game in prime time. Yeah, give me that Terps Scarlet Knights game.
No, I'm with you in that one. I do think I would trust Rutgers more, largely because of this defense, and Talia has the tendency to turn the ball over a time or 2 or 6 in a game. So I think I would take the Scarlet Knights for that reason. And ultimately, too, I trust Greg Schiano as a coach a hell of a lot more than I'd ever trust Mike Loxley.
Take a quick break here to let you know whether you're watching us on the Penn State channel or the Big Ten channel here on the Voice of College Football, Mark Rogers TV. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Also, blackshoediaries.com. You can check out Marty and I's work. Marty, I'm assuming you're working on your 3 takeaways right now.
I am.
I'll have my position grades up tomorrow. And also now, of course, with football season, regular season dwindling down, we're getting heavily into the winter sports. We have tremendous wrestling coverage over at Black Sheep Diaries. Hockey team's been up and down, but it's a program showing promise. And basketball team, it's going to obviously there's going to be some rough sledding at times for Micah Shrewsbury's first year, but with the recruiting class he's got coming in, future does look bright for that program too. So, whatever winter sport you follow, come check us out, blackshoediaries.com. Marty, so Michigan State next week. The game suddenly got a bit more interesting, in my opinion. In part because of Christian Veilleux stepping in for Penn State, and also just because of how absolutely destroyed Sparty got by Ohio State. It was Buckeyes led 49-0 at the half, and they go on to win by a final of 56-7. Marty, do you think? I guess it depends too. Do you think is there going to be a quarterback controversy going into next week? Do you think they will and should get the start, or do you think if Sean Clifford's 100% healthy, that he should get the start? And do you think Penn State can exploit Michigan State? Their biggest problem is lack of a pass defense. They've been pretty abysmal in that all year long, to be frank. Can they exploit that? Maybe not quite like Ohio State did, but can they exploit that enough to come out the win in East Lansing?
Well, I mean, I think as long as they have a healthy quarterback, rather that be Sean Clifford, or if Sean Clifford isn't healthy, Christian Veilleux. I think they can exploit that passing game, or that secondary, excuse me. Because, I mean, you look at what Penn State's done this year throwing the ball. The big play ability is there. They have not gotten it nearly enough, obviously. But the ability is there with Jahan Dotson, with Malik Mega, as we saw today. I know Mega's a guy who the staff was extremely high on coming into the season, but was hurt earlier in the year. Else we probably would have seen a lot more of Mega earlier in the season. Parker Washington, Condre Lambert-Smith can hit the big play, these tight ends down the seams. So I do think they can exploit that passing, the secondary of Michigan State's, but it all hinges on having a healthy quarterback. Sean Clifford, if he's healthy and playing, I think it can happen. Now, I will say, if Sean Clifford is not healthy, after what we saw today, you need to go with Christian Veilleux. Don't have a repeat of the Illinois game where you don't trust your backup, especially because right now there's no reason not to trust your backup. And Michigan State, obviously, is a light years better team than Illinois is. As for the Spartans, I'll be curious to see where they're even kind of at mentally, because you go from being ranked, what were they? They got up to number 3, I believe. And
I think they were third at one point in the college football playoff rankings. Before they lost to Purdue, I think they were number 3.
Yeah, and you lose to Purdue in a game that wasn't super competitive, and then you come out this week and just get trounced by Ohio State. So now you're obviously not making the playoff. You're not going to the Big Ten title game. Kenneth Walker's probably not winning the Heisman. So a lot of the motivation that Sparty had for next week is gone. Now, that said, Mel Tucker is a terrific coach. I'm sure he'll have his team ready to go. But I do think that has to be a big factor where, and not saying Penn State wouldn't be motivated, because they should be. This gives you an opportunity to get what would be their, I believe, 3rd top 25 win of the year, including 2nd on the road, improve your bowl status, still have a chance to get to 9 wins. There's still things on the table there. But from Michigan State's standpoint, obviously there's a big difference between, had they won today, they would have controlled their own destiny next week. They would be a win away from going to Indy and then a win away from the playoff. So there's a big difference between facing that team and facing a team who, the difference between winning and losing might be the Citrus Bowl and like the Outback Bowl. Even the New Year's Six is probably off the table for them now, because I'm assuming Michigan gets one and Wisconsin gets the other. So I think the Michigan State not having as much to play for could be a big factor too, because again, that just cuts into their motivation level. And for Penn State, you really have the chance to, I guess, kind of play spoiler, because you can take what once looked like a potential special season for Michigan State and prevent them from even getting to double digits. And really, if today didn't do it, definitely put the nail in the coffin of Kenneth Walker's Heisman bid.
Yeah, I think I agree with the motivation factor. That being said, Mel Tucker, I think what stuck out to me was the Michigan game when they were trailing by 16 points in the second half, and they seemed like they were dead in the water. I'm still amazed at how they managed to come back against Michigan. It's testament to Tucker and the team for having that mental fortitude. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, they've gotten exploited lately by Purdue, by Ohio State today. That, and then again, now they're out of the playoff picture. They still. I will say, I think with they beat Penn State next week. I think they still could get into a New Year's Six bowl. I think there would be room for them somewhere, maybe in the Fiesta, perhaps. I don't know about the Rose, but I think Michigan probably ends up getting that over them. But we'll see. But if Penn State beats them, then yeah, I mean they're going probably to the Citrus, I would guess. Because I think best case bowl scenario right now for Penn State is Outback if they win next week. And I guess before I get into the bowl picture for Penn State, man, what is it with coaches what is it with news about coaches getting extensions and then their teams just laying an egg that following Saturday? Because you saw the news this week. For those of you who didn't, there's rumors. I don't know if it's been confirmed, but
I don't think anything's official yet. Just
nothing official, but it's being reported. Mel Tucker getting a 10-year, $95 million extension at Michigan State. This is presumably being done or being put out there to try to scare off SEC suitors, because Tucker was a name being bandied about heavily for the LSU job. And frankly, if that LSU might be the last SC job opening up. There's a decent chance Florida opens up too at by the end of next week. The way the Gators got trounced by South Carolina and beat Samford in a shootout, which they were trailing by 3 touchdowns at one point. It's hard not to feel like the end is near for Dan Mullen there. So that's another potential landing spot for Tucker if Florida really wanted him. So this seems like a preemptive strike by Michigan State to try to hang on to something good, but it feels like a bit of an overreaction in a way. He's done a great job. Obviously, the team. I mean, no one had any expectations for Sparty this year. They were wondering if they would even make a bowl game. And here he goes. He hit the portal hard for a bunch of guys. He struck gold, especially with Kenneth Walker, and they propelled that all the way to a number 3 playoff ranking at one point. Regardless, even if they lose to Penn State next week, at 9 to go 9-3 when most people were wondering if he'd even win 6 games this year. It's impressive. Very good job on Mel Tucker's part, but he needs to show that he can sustain it, that he can actually, and the only way he can do that is if you're actually recruiting and developing, high school and JUCO kids that you bring in. I don't feel like hitting the portal every single offseason is a sustainable thing. But then again, I guess we've only been in pro's only been around for a few years. So, perhaps I'm wrong on that. What's your take, Marty, on how to sustain a program? Do you think portal's the way to go, or do you think you still need to recruit and develop high school kids?
Oh, I definitely think the majority's got to be done with recruiting and developing. I don't think it's any different than professional sports where ultimately your drafts are what's going to make it or break it for you, And yes, you can use the portals like free agency. You can use it to go out and fill holes, but I don't think you can do it every single offseason. Now, I think this past offseason he had to do it because A, he really purged that roster of some guys, and B, they just had a lot of holes to fill. And like you said, to his credit, they struck gold, especially with Kenneth Walker. But I think the biggest test for Mel Tucker with that program moving forward is going to be the ability to recruit and develop guys. Now, that said, like I've said, I think Mel Tucker is a tremendous football coach. I have no doubts he can, I don't know if it's possible for Michigan State to ever really get back to those heights they had in that, what was it, like 2009 through 2015 stretch under Mark D'Antonio.
I'd say that early mid 2000 stretch. I think they peaked in 2015 when they made the playoffs.
Yeah, 2015 was the year they went to the playoffs and got slapped around by Alabama. And then they came back 2 years later for that one last 10-win season under D'Antonio. But I don't think they can ever get back to that. I just don't think they're the program. Ultimately, the program as a whole is never going to be higher than the 4th best program in their division. Excuse me. But I don't think there's any reason Mel Tucker can't have them as a team who consistently wins 8-9 games. And then if you have a year where, you have a senior heavy roster, or Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, one of them has a down year, like we've seen that they can't trend up those years and win 10 or 11 to maybe compete for the division title. So I do think the ability is there for Michigan State to continue to be a very good program, but the heavy lifting is going to have to be done through recruiting and through player development, just as it has to be done at any school.
No doubt. I would agree with you on that too. I do think long term you got to be able to recruit, develop high school kids, and I think he was regarded as a good recruiter so I have no doubt he's capable of doing it. Now whether he does that remains, time will tell. But certainly Michigan State is, they definitely seem like a team that's risen from the low point of where they were just a couple of years ago when D'Antonio's final season. So it'll be interesting to see how much of a thorn in the side they are for Penn State and Michigan, Ohio State going forward. I guess going back to Penn State, their postseason picture, now it comes down to, if you ask me, I think it really comes down to, if they win next week, I think no doubt in my mind they're Outback Bowl bound at 8-4. They lose 7-5. I think it seems to me it's between either the Music City or the Las Vegas Bulls. I don't think they fall down to the pinstripe, and I'm sure Nashville will love nothing more than to have James Franklin come back to where his head coaching career started. And Vegas, I'm sure they would love to have the allure of a team like Penn State. Penn State fans travel very well. And, and like you, a lot of Penn State fans like gambling. So I'm sure they will no doubt come flocking to Vegas, the right before New Year's Eve to catch a team in action. So what do you think, Marty, as far as how the bowl picture is shaping out for Penn State?
Actually, first off, I didn't realize that the Vegas Bowl or the Music City Bowl are higher priority than the Pinstripe Bowl. I just did not know that. I thought Pinstripe Bowl was like next year after the New Year's Days, but no, I agree. I think if Penn State wins next week, it's definitely gonna be Jacksonville in the Outback Bowl. At this point, Ohio State has entered full Death Star mode. They're going to make the playoff. Honestly, I think if there's anybody who can beat Georgia, it might be Ohio State. And then, like you said earlier, I think Michigan, barring being absolutely embarrassed next week, is probably going to the Rose. Wisconsin gets a New Year's Six bowl berth after they lose to Ohio State and Indy. And then I guess the real holdup, the only thing that could potentially prevent Penn State from going to the Outback Bowl, if Michigan State does fall to the Citrus, maybe Iowa gets it over them, but I'm sure the Outback Bowl would much rather get Penn State, bigger fan base, better TV ratings, all of this. But I have a hard time envisioning an 8-4 Penn State team with the brand that they are, with 3 top 25 wins. And you can easily explain away 2 of their losses to the quarterback being injured. And the other 2 losses would be to a playoff team and the Rose Bowl team. I can't see that team not getting at least a New Year's Day bowl. So I agree with you. I think they win next week. It's Outback. If they lose, probably Music City or the Pinstripe. Personally, I would prefer the Pinstripe, I think, just because in my mind, the Pinstripe Bowl carries more weight. I don't know. Maybe this is just me being nostalgic because one of the best early wins of the early tenure of the Franklin era, and still one of my favorite games of the Franklin era. One of my favorite games ever as a Penn State fan was that 2014 Outback Bowl, their first bowl game after the sanctions, and they had a late rally to put it in overtime and won it in overtime, and it was just a tremendous football game. So I think for that reason, that bowl game probably always carries a little special place in my heart, so I would not complain at all about a return to New York if they are 7-5.
Well, if that does happen, I'd be curious to see if Penn State fans pack Yankee Stadium like they did the last time. I mean, they were out in full force. It sounded like Beaver Stadium North almost with how much they outnumber the Boston College supporters at that game. So that'll be interesting. But I think I really does feel like though Music City would probably be the more likely destination if they lose next week to Michigan State. But I think, like I said, if they win next week at Michigan State, I think they're a virtual lock for the Outback and another New Year's Day Florida Bowl, which, hey, I guess given all the ups and downs of this season, it sounds like an appropriate place to finish. And I guess, maybe we can save this topic for next week. But, when we look back on this season a few years from now, what are we going to think? Are we even going to think about this season, first of all? But if we do, how are we going to look back on it?
I mean, to me, my mind is always going to go to one of 2 places: the inability to run the football, and what happens if Sean Clifford doesn't get hurt against Iowa. Even with Clifford getting hurt against Iowa, that's why I think, to me, the biggest story of the season is not being able to run the football. Because even once Cliff goes down against Iowa, if you can still just run the ball at even an average ability, you get out of there with a victory because you're going to churn more clock. You're going to burn more time. You probably sneak another field goal in there somewhere. And you definitely beat Illinois if you could have run the football. So, you're still sitting here right now, probably 9-2 at worst, still looking at your 6th berth. It's just, to me, it's going to be a season. I don't even want to say what if because of the Cliff injury. Now, I do think if Cliff doesn't get hurt, they beat Iowa, they beat Illinois without a doubt. But to me, the biggest story of this season is always going to be the inability to run the football. Because like I said, if you could run the football, even at an average rate, you would have still beaten Iowa. You would have still beaten Illinois. And even Michigan last week. Who knows? Because you had to look at the 4th and 2, the fake field goal fiasco. If you have confidence in your running game there, you're going to line up. You're going to run it down their throats. You're going to get a touchdown. And, that could have completely changed that game too. So to me, the biggest takeaway from the season will always be the inability to run the football, which to me is super unfortunate because the big takeaway from this season should be this defense. This defense is good. They are loaded with NFL talent. I mean, you look up and down, Arnold Ebiketie, Curtis Jacobs, Jesse Luketa, the entire secondary. Ellis Brooks will be on an NFL roster somewhere. There are 8, 9, 10 guys on this defense who are going to be legitimate NFL guys, maybe even more. And it's really unfortunate for those players and for Brent Pry and for his assistants that this season will not be remembered for what it should be, which is one of the best Nittany Lion defenses of the 21st century.
Yeah, it feels. I think that's what's going to bother me most about this year is just it feels like they wasted one of the best defenses they fielded probably since the mid 2000s. I'm thinking the 2004. Well, ironically enough, it is like a pseudo 2004. Now the offense not as terrible as that 2004 offense was, which just had a complete lack of playmakers at the skill positions. But with no discernible running game and having to rely completely on one quarterback staying healthy, it kind of felt like it brought things down. I guess to play off it, we hate to play the whole what if, but you have to wonder if Christian Veilleux, you have to wonder if he should have been at some point playing in that Iowa game, especially when after a couple of drives with Roberson, they were struggling to even get the snap off without false starting.
Yeah, that was one thing I said on Twitter during the game today, and some people kind of barked at me and told me it's a pointless to say it or whatever, but I don't think it is because once it was clear Roberson was not going to be able to get the job done in Iowa City, if you go to Veilleux, if they get anywhere near the Christian Veilleux they got today, they would have won that game, and they would have beaten Illinois with that Christian Veilleux. So it's just it is a what if on that front too, because if you pull those off and you're undefeated going to Columbus, you probably still lose to Ohio. I mean, honestly, they couldn't have played Ohio State much better than they did. But let's say you go to Columbus and you still suffer that one-score loss to the Buckeyes, and then you come back and you beat Maryland and you beat Michigan and you beat Rutgers. With how chaotic this season has been, I still think if Penn State could have got out of this at 11-1, with that one loss being that close loss in Columbus, they could have had a legitimate argument for a number 4 seed in the playoff. Now, obviously, all of that is, like you said, more talk for the offseason banter and whatnot. But I do wonder. I would love to know what, and obviously we're never going to get an answer to this. I would love to know what the honest to God train of thought was with James Franklin and Mike Yurcich at Iowa watching Taquan Roberson struggle the way he did and them not going to Christian Veilleux, especially after seeing the way Veilleux played today. And now I will say it is extremely possible that in the last month Veilleux has made a big jump because of how much time he missed, that maybe the light bulb just finally went on for him, whatever it was. But I would love to know their reasoning behind not going to him against Iowa or against Illinois after what we saw from him today. Unless, I mean, it's possible he's a kid who doesn't practice. There's plenty of players in sports who don't practice well and then come out and are awesome on game days. But, some of the reporting from Sean Fitz and guys like that, some of the insiders who will be there for parts of practice, always seem to say that at practice, Veilleux was at least equal to, if not better than Roberson. So I don't think that was necessarily an issue either.
No doubt. And as far as the quarterback room looks going forward after this year, it sounds like no confirmation yet, but it does sound like from some insiders that this will be Sean Clifford's. Today would have been Sean Clifford's last appearance at Beaver Stadium. He'll move on after this year, probably just give the NFL a shot. Can't see him being drafted, but he could latch onto a team as a free agent, I'm sure. But going forward, so you'll have obviously Veilleux showing promise today. You got Drew Aller, Bo Previla coming in January. But I'm presuming Taquan Roberson hits the portal. Won't be with Penn State much longer. So you have to figure Penn State's I would imagine they're gonna scour the portal hard to bring in an experienced quarterback. I don't know who. Haven't seen a whole lot of names thrown big quarterback names throw themselves in the portal just yet. I mean, Spencer Rattler is one that's commonly been bandied about. So we'll see. But Do you think they hit the portal for a QB, hit the portal hard for a QB this offseason?
I think you have to. You know, as good as Vayu looked today, he still is a true freshman who's played in one game. Like you said, Taquan Roberson. I mean, I don't think Taquan Roberson was on the sideline today. That's a possibility. He's already getting ready to transfer out. But even if Taquan Roberson's here, he's clearly not capable of playing in the Big Ten. So, that leaves you with Drew Allar and Bo Pribula. Now, albeit Allar, we've talked about him at length, number one quarterback in the country. Pribula is a 4-star, very good player at his own rights. But you cannot, under any circumstance, go into next year with your 3 scholarship quarterbacks being a redshirt freshman and 2 true freshmen. That is asking for disaster on so many levels. And I think even if a VU or an Allar win the starting job, you need to have somebody else here. Now, I do think one thing that helps Penn State tremendously this offseason, as opposed to last with the portal, is this offseason they're going to be much more attractive landing spot to transfer quarterbacks. As much as Sean Clifford struggled last year, he was still a returning starter. And quarterbacks weren't going to want to come in and compete with Clifford. Most transfer portal quarterbacks are looking to go somewhere where they're going to get the starting job, So I think that's a factor as well that will help them a lot. Like you said, we've already seen the portal start to fill up with quarterbacks. We're going to get more in the winter and into the spring. But I can't envision a scenario where Penn State does not bring in a transfer quarterback this offseason, nothing else for depth. You never want to take a guy just to take a guy, but quarterback in the portal this offseason might be the one time you have to take a guy just to take a guy, just to make sure there is depth there. Even if you don't love somebody, I think you have to settle on a quarterback you at least like and see some potential in, again, just for depth purposes. And the thing is, too, if you get into the fall next year and, you say you have an Allar and you don't think he's totally ready, the last thing you want to do is throw him out there before you think he's ready and you potentially derail that development. And, maybe as Penn State fans, we're jaded because, the last 2 times we landed the number 1 quarterback in the country in Christian Hackenberg and Anthony Morelli, things didn't work out too swell. But, I think you need to put yourself in a position to where you can handle Drew Allar exactly how you want to and exactly how you see fit.
Right, and hopefully, Aller won't have to get thrown into the fire like they did with Christian Hackenberg, which was, due to scholarship depth and all that, they kind of had to force him into action from day one. They had to get a guy in the portal, maybe Spencer Rattler even, who knows? But somebody, who's capable of winning the starting job, someone who's, maybe got a couple years of eligibility left and looking to, put some more on tape for NFL scouts. And, and also just kind of be that older mentor to like I said, you're going to have 3 scholarship quarterbacks. One is a redshirt freshman, and then 2 that'll be true freshmen. You want to have some older guy who's been around the block, been there, done that, who can kind of serve that leadership role in the quarterback room. And I guess speaking of, filling depth in other spots, I'm thinking, I think linebacker, defensive end, those are a couple other spots that stick out to me that the staff will need to hit the portal hard for to fill some holes. Are there any other positions that you think
safety could be one as well, wide receiver too?
Right, receiver, because even though as much as I think Parker Washington might be ready to step up as a number 1 guy next year, and I think Keandre Lambert-Smith could be solid too. And Malik Mega, I think he's definitely a guy to keep an eye out for. Maybe not just for 2022, but maybe even these last 2 games of the year. Michigan State next week and the bowl game. But that being said, it does feel like they could maybe grab someone from the portal who's a little more seasoned, just to help out there. So I think it's going to be an interesting offseason as far as, obviously, important thing is keep that recruiting class intact, which, frankly, as long as James Franklin doesn't leave, and I don't get the vibe that he is, it sounds like they're going to announce any day now an extension.
Do you see his comments post-game about that?
About the extension, or?
Yeah.
I haven't seen his post-game.
I just saw it on Twitter scrolling through. I guess Neil Rudell, who writes for the Altoona Mirror, asked him about his comments he supposedly made this week at the quarterback club that I'm not going anywhere. And his response was, I made that statement because I thought something was going to happen a little sooner. He then continued and said he will address it more on Tuesday. So it does seem like at some point within probably the next, 24 to 72 hours, we're going to get some clarification on what does appear to be a new contract between Penn State and James Franklin.
Right. That comment just sounds like, it wasn't not all the I's have been dotted or T's have been crossed just yet, but they're getting there. And yeah, it sounds like probably I would imagine this week before the Michigan State game, they'll announce it. And hopefully that doesn't mean they get trounced 56-7 like Sparty did today after the rumors of Mel Tucker's extension happened. So we'll see how that goes. Anyway, Marty, any final thoughts before we call it a day?
No, I don't think so. All around, really good day for Penn State. Especially what I liked most, and this is something I got into a little bit in my 3 takeaways on Black Shoe Diaries, is that we saw a lot of younger guys, Vayu, Malik Mega, Theo Johnson, Lana Tangwell up on the offensive line. We saw guys who they're going to look to play big roles next year get an extended look today because apparently half the team had the flu, and they played well, which is good to see. At this point in the season, what matters most for Penn State, more than wins and losses, honestly, is development for next year and beyond. And I feel like there was a lot of that today. One other guy I want to give a shout out to, Keziah Izzard. Man, that guy is going to be a freaking dude up front. He was all over the field today. He's been getting better week in and week out at defensive tackle. And there were 2 times today where he missed the sack, got up off the ground, and proceeded to run no Vedral down and still get a sack. His motor is insane. He will definitely be a guy to watch down the stretch this year and the next year and beyond for the Nittany Lions.
No doubt. I've forgotten to mention Izzard beast today. He definitely obviously would have loved to have PJ Musfer out there, but seeing how he's performed, it makes me excited for the D-line going forward into 2022 and beyond. But that's what I call it a wrap. Once again, Tim Aiden and Marty Lee. Marty, you're going to have your 3 takeaways up soon.
They are currently scheduled to go live at 4:30 p.m. So everybody make sure
4:30 p.m. Yep,
whenever you're watching this,
10 minutes from now as of this recording. So have the blackshares.com and check that out. My position grades will be up sometime tomorrow. And of course, once again, from the Penn State Big Ten channel, hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already and you enjoyed our post-game shows so you can get alerts whenever we go live. And speaking of which, yes, next week will be our last post-game show for the regular season. Not quite sure yet for the bowl game schedule, but once that's figured out, hopefully we'll also have a post-game show after the bowl game, whether that's Outback, Music City, Vegas, Pinstripe, what have you. Anyway, thanks for tuning in and enjoy the rest of your college football Saturday.